in. Ah, Jake. Yeah, we learn on the phone, Mr. Haber. Almost Monday through Thursday, Jake. Have a phone on the phone. Me and Jake learn. We prepared a Gemara beforehand. He said he tries to.
Whatever you allow.
He's a humble man. Okay. Tana, we're now in the Gemara. Amma Rabbi Yosef Rechanina. The first word of the line is Amma Rabbi Yosef, Aleph Reish. You see it over here some. Not yet, not yet. Okay, Amma Rabbi Rechanina. Modim Chachom Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara brought in Machlokas Chachom Rabbi Eliezer whether you say a bracha of Boripre Geffen on wine that has not been diluted. In those days, the wine was very, very strong. The grapes were stronger, and until you put in water into it, diluted with water, it was very common. They had three to one. Water was 3-to-1 water to the wine, because that's how strong the wine was. And the question was in the Gemara, before you diluted it, do you say a Boripre Geffen? Because Rabbi Eliezer says it was not elevated to its proper state. To say a special bracha that the rabbis instituted for wine, he's of the opinion only when it was elevated to the proper state of wine that you drink in a normal fashion. However, raw wine.
You had to have how much wine?
They had 1/4. It was common that they had 1/4 wine to 3-to-1. The ratio was 3-to-1. Every 3 ounces of water is 1 ounce of wine. That was the common way that the Gemara seems to was the more common way. The Yerushalmi in the Jerusalem Talmud said they have to put in a little bit of water. It doesn't say you have to put 3-to-1, but in the Gemara, it seems that the common thing was 3-to-1. And you should know, interesting, even today in halacha, I once had a question when the when a child was young, we would dilute the grape juice with a lot of water. And then, because it's not good for the kids to drink so much grape juice, whatever it was, whatever the story was, and by mistake, a Friday night, we made kiddush on the grape juice that was diluted very well with a lot of water. And the question was that kiddush a good kiddush or not a good kiddush? I had a substantial amount of water, so I went to Rabbi Feinstein's apartment. He lived in the next building. We share a lobby. So I knocked on his door. It was Friday night. After I realized after drinking it, it was not. So much. So he said it was not, as long as it's up to you have 5 parts of water to 1 part of wine for it to be considered still wine. The fact that the Gemara was talking about they put 3 parts water to 1 part wine. First of all, that wine was much stronger. But again, that was the common thing back then. In order for it to lose, and it's no longer considered wine. If it's more than 5-to-1 water to.
What about it?
Pesach, I think the halacha would also would also technically be the same if you needed diluted with water. The problem is that there's a special mitzvah on Pesach that you should drink a wine. You have the ability to become intoxicated. Not that no one's becoming intoxicated, but that's the wine of cherus, of freedom. And because you have to drink that type of wine, so therefore we would not want to dilute it so much, because then you take away from that ability to. That's not a free man's wine when he celebrates. It's not the way you celebrate with the wine which is so diluted with water. Now, Rav Avadia Yosef has the whole thing about wine. It's all the sugar that's in the wine that you have to be careful. He was talking about the Sfardim, about being extra careful of the sugar, because if there's too much sugar, it might lose the status of wine also. So you have to, or whether it's the sugar or the water, what would be considered that it loses the status of wine. So I know he spoke about that. That's a whole discussion. Maybe tomorrow I'll take out more about that. But when he writes about that, many times you see that he'll write about being careful, make sure there's not that's you're really making a bracha on wine, but it's not considered because of all the sugar and other stuff that it might be considered lose its status of wine. Maybe tomorrow we'll take out more about that. Okay. 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 So the Gemara says, so with that background, so Rabbi Eliezer says you have to dilute the wine in order. Morning, Avi. Morning. Baruch haba. So happy that you're here. So he says that you have to dilute the wine in order for you to go ahead and to say the bracha Baruch Pri Gefen. However, the Chachamim say, you see, here's the irony of the thing. Until now, we're talking about how much water. Here we're talking about how much water would make it lose the status of wine. And our Gemara is referring to if you don't put in water, it's not wine. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. It's because it's too strong. It's not drank as wine. Just like you have the halachas of brachos, if you eat something raw, if you take a piece of raw wheat, you don't say a mizonot on raw wheat because that's not the normal way. It wasn't brought to its status of being grounded and cooked. So therefore, it doesn't get the mizonos. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says it's a Baruch Priya 8 on this wine that wasn't diluted. The Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim say that, Avi, if you have wine that was not diluted, you heard yes, right. The wine that was not diluted, you say a Baruch Priya Gefen. That's what the Chachamim say. Even though you didn't put water into the wine, and it seems like concentrate, right? It seems like it's something. The Gemara is going to explain what's the reason for the Chachamim. But now the Gemara says a different point. Now the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yosef Bechanina, Modim Chachamim le Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim admit Rabbi Eliezer because shel bracha. Avi, the first word of the line is because shel bracha.
Yes.
And then by kosher bracha.
Yeah.
What's a kosher bracha? Kiddush is a kosher bracha. Birkat Hamazon is a cup that you're saying it's a bracha. That they instituted that you should say a bracha on the coast because you have a mitzvah, you're doing a mitzvah. Yes. The kosher bracha, she'ein mevorchin alav ad sheyitel toch hamayim.
The vessel.
The coast. You have to put in water. That even though the Chachamim say it still say a Baruch Pri Gefen without adding the water into it, but when it comes to saying Kiddush, or you're going to say you're going in a marriage under the chuppah, we have a cup of wine. That wine, the Chachamim admit that you should first put in the water before you say a bracha Baruch Pri Gefen. If you want to have a drink, and I want to go out for a drink, I don't have to put in the water in order to say Baruch Pri Gefen. The Chachamim hold I can say Baruch Pri Gefen without diluting it at all, pure raw wine. But if it's a kosher bracha, but if it's a kiddush, I need to put in the water first. Why? If you told me it's a gefen without putting in the water, why? Because when you do a mitzvah, you got to do it in a very nice fashion. And therefore, if you did not dilute it with water, since it's not so enjoyable, the wine, it's so strong. So that's not the nice way to go ahead and do the mitzvah. So when you do a mitzvah, you do it right, like you do with beauty. When you get an etro, you get a nice etro, you get a nice mezuzah. You don't go into the store, I want the cheapest mezuzah, I want the cheapest etro. But then you're not doing the mitzvah in a nice fashion. So that's what the Gemara says. My timer, you do a mitzvah in the nicest way. And since you need a mitzvah min hamuvcha in the nicest way, and therefore, since it's much nicer, it's much better quality, the wine that when it's diluted with water than if it's raw state. Therefore, you have to be careful about that. Okay. Now the Gemara questions the Rabbanan's opinion. Rabbanan l'may chazi. The Rabbanan said that on raw wine, you say a Bore Priya Gefen. How could you say what is it fit for? Who could drink it? It's too sharp, it's too strong. So the Gemara says, Amar of Zera, Chazei Likuryati. It's fit for Karyati. So the Meiri and the Shita Megabeta says Karyati is when you eat a sharp food. After having a sharp food, then you take this raw wine, you can really, it'll take away from that the sharpness of the food that you have. The Israelis like to eat sharp food, right? They're known for sharp, spicy food. So when you have a spicy food, so this wine is good to drink after having that spicy food, and therefore he says it is used as a drink. And since it is used as a drink, you could go ahead and say the Bore Pri Hagefen on it. It has been elevated as a drink. That's one opinion. Rashi learns that it's something that's used for medical purposes. It's a drink. They take raw wine without diluting with water, and they add some other ingredients to it, and that's very healthy for certain type. So Rashi says it's something old wine. Some say it is. Let's see what he says. It's made from wine, honey, and some other maybe some spices or some other wine and honey. So you mix the honey and some spice and some peppers or some other things together with this, and that would be healthy for certain types of sicknesses. So that's so since it's used as a drink to help someone from we have when you have people have a cold, they have chicken soup, right? That's the Jewish common remedy. So this was something that they had the raw wine with some, and they added some. What are the ingredients? All right. So if you want to show me your Gemara for a second, Kiva, take your Gemara for a second. I want to just take a look at something over here.
He said that in the old days,
right?
The people of the winery who made the wine was very, very strong.
Very strong wine, right?
Make it too strong. Now today the wines are already diluted. You understand? People today, when you're drinking wine today, it's already in a comfort way. Look like in the old days.
Old, right? Very much stronger, right? But Avi, even our wine, if it's not diluted, but the grapes are not as strong. It's not as strong as the raw wine back then. Meaning the raw wine back then was much stronger than the raw wine today. So they say over here that they use the raw wine, honey and pepper, and they also used wine with clear water and balsam oil. These were some of the things that they used to as a medical drink, and it was healthy. So therefore, and since the majority is wine, it has a status of wine, right? And therefore, the bracha would be a Bore Pri Gefen on this drink, even though you mix some honey, like anything else.
Right.
You mix certain ingredients, but you go after the main ingredient, and the main ingredient of this drink was wine. Mr. Haber, is that clear? Okay. Now the Gemara continues. The Gemara says, Tana Rabbana, Arba Dvarim Nemru B'Pat. There were 4 things that they said regarding bread. Ein menichen basar chai ala pat. You can't go ahead and take raw meat and put raw meat on top of bread. Let's say you want to go ahead, you have bread in your house, and you want to go ahead and you want to put some raw meat on top of your loaf of bread. You can't do that. Why not? And here it's not making a sandwich. You want to hold it. It's not that you want to use, you want to hold your raw meat because you're not going to eat the raw meat raw, right? So you want to store your raw meat and how you're going to store your raw meat, and you want to put it on a clean surface. So you're using the bread as a clean surface, like a plate. But the problem is when you put raw meat on top of bread, the bread will get ruined, right? Because of the even if you soaked and salt the meat already, but the texture of having that wet raw meat on top of bread, it'll get moist, the moistness, the liquid that's inside the raw meat will go ahead and ruin the bread. And you're not allowed to do that to bread. It becomes ruined as a result of, even though it's serving a purpose, meaning even though you're using the bread for a purpose of holding the meat, but you have to have a certain level of derech eretz. And for bread, it would seem like this opinion is saying specifically bread. It's unique to bread, and this opinion would seemingly hold that if it's not bread, if it's some other type of food, if I'm doing it for a purpose, I need to hold the meat, maybe it's not a problem. But bread, which is a basic staple of life, you have to a certain level of derech eretz. You conduct yourself a certain way when it comes to how you deal and deal with bread. That's what it would seem. There is an opinion of Rabbeinu Yonah that you see, they're bothered by the concern that I'm asking. The question is, why is it only bread? There's a din of bal tashchit. You can't waste any type of food. So why is the Gemara singling out bread? You can't put raw meat on bread. You shouldn't be able to put raw meat on a fruit if it's going to ruin the fruit. So I was thinking, but that maybe perhaps we're talking about a thing that in a case where you need that raw fruit to hold the bread. So maybe that's not called bal tashchit. It's not called wasting. Wasting food is when you take a food and it's just wasted for no purpose. But if the food you're using is because you need the food, you need that food to help the other thing. Maybe that's not, and the meat is much more important than the other food. So maybe that's not a problem. It's not called wasting, because I need to be able to hold my meat somewhere, and that's the paramount importance, and that's much better and more important than the fruit. So if the fruit has to get ruined in order to help, that might not be called bal tashchit. That's not called wasting. Nevertheless, but when it comes to bread, if I'm going to ruin bread, that they don't want it. That's what I would offer the approach. The Chafetz Chaim in the Mishnah Berurah says other foods are going to get ruined as a result of putting the meat on it. It also would be forbidden. But I'm saying perhaps that what about if you need a plot? Meaning you're right. If I want to just put a piece of raw meat on a fruit for no reason, I want to put it on, but I don't need to put it on there. I could put it somewhere else. Of course, that's called bal tashchit. If I could go ahead and hold my raw meat without ruining other food, I have no right to ruin other food just to hold my meat. But if I'm in a situation where I need that, I don't have another place to put it, that's what I would suggest is the difference. But if clearly the Chafetz Chaim writes, if I don't need to, if I want to just put my meat on a piece of fruit, but I don't need to do that, I'm wasting fruit. I'm wasting the fruit. It's not a special, unique halacha to bread. The question on the Chafetz Chaim is, if then why did the Gemara single out bread? I can't put raw meat on bread. If the Gemara means it's not only bread, you can't put raw meat on any type of food that's going to get ruined. So why does it emphasize, unless bread is a type of thing that easily gets ruined as a result of having the meat on top of it? Others say what Avi was saying. The Rabbeinu Yonah says that maybe we're talking about raw meat before it was soaked and salted. Before it was soaked and salted, then the blood might go into the bread. And therefore, since the bread would absorb the blood, then you have a big problem. Other type of foods, if you put it on top, maybe you could just wash it off. So therefore, it might not be such an issue. Therefore, the Gemara is emphasizing you can't put raw meat on bread, but then you'll have the problem of the blood that you would have to wash it. That's mixed into the bread, and it's not so easy to get it out. Okay, that's the first thing the Gemara says. Second halacha, ein ma'virin kos mole alapa. When you want to pass a cup of wine, let's say you're passing a cup of wine to your wife or your sister, and there's bread on the table. You have to be careful, and this is a halacha that's for Shabbat, or any time. Our chalot are usually covered, but let's say if you pass wine over bread, well, you might spill of the wine, and it might go ahead and if it spills, it's going to ruin the bread. So the question would be, why are you only concerned about bread? You can't waste anything, right? You can't waste any food. The question here is we want to make sure you shouldn't come to waste the bread. So we say you can't pass wine over bread. Because what will happen? Maybe something will spill and ruin the bread. So it would seem to me, if it's not bread, if it's other food, we're not going to have to be so concerned and take that extra step. Say, watch out, maybe you're going to spill. Why do I have to be concerned I'm going to spill? I don't generally spill. And maybe I don't have to be as cautious. Perhaps the Gemara specifically, but when you're dealing with bread, there's a different level of cautiousness that you need to take that you can't pass a thing of wine over bread. But you can ask the same question. Why only bread? If it's a question of wasting, I should not be able to pass a thing of wine over any type of food. You hear the? Yes. So I presume it's a special thing for, unless you're going to say that bread again is a type of food that has that if the wine goes on it would spoil, and therefore any type of food that wine would go on it, you can't pass something over it. That would be a good question to look up in the halacha. Is it specific? Why is it emphasizing the bread? Okay.
The reason is the bread here is related, I think it's related and elevate the idea of the context of the wine and the bread. You can have a piece of cake.
But it's not bread, it's a different level.
Right.
Right,
You didn't mention that fruit is different story, but you can definitely have other objects that are very similar to the effect of the bread. And it's not talking about them because if it was a cake, so it was a cake. The issue here is the bread, because the bread represents
life.
Exactly.
The basic
so
staple of
in
life.
some way, the idea here is that they're raising up the importance of specific the elements.
How you deal with bread.
Because the bread has a bracha and it has consuming specific things that it's very important to keep it pure. And by the way, what you're saying about how to approach that, like how to respect that kind of the wine and the bread. That's what I think that is the reason. No?
Yeah, it seems like something is very, you see, the Shulchan Aruch says, you can't put a cup of wine over a full cup of wine. Meaning, because if you have a half a cup of wine,
Right.
no problem, it's not going to spill.
Right.
A full cup of wine, which is common that it's going to spill.
Right.
That's the addition of the Shulchan Aruch, a close malay. The Gemara doesn't say a full cup, but that's what, so that would be the problem. And the Mishnah Berurah says, because it's common, or it's that's going to spill. Okay, but that's something to think about. Emphasis on bread than other things. Okay, then the Gemara continues. Now, halacha number 3. The ain zorkin at the pot. You're not allowed to throw bread. I can't throw bread to you. Now, the people who have a custom on Friday night that they throw the bread, they need to answer this Gemara. They need to explain themselves because the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch both say you can't throw bread because the Gemara says you can't throw bread. Again, this is something that needs to be. They need to explain themselves. In Ashkenaz world, they will not throw bread. They don't. Right. So we were suggesting yesterday. Where did the thing? Why do people? The idea is number one, you don't hand bread hand to hand.
Right.
Because that's a way of a poor person comes to the door, you hand them a piece of bread. So the law is you're not supposed to hand bread to another person, you put the bread down in front of them. So I presume once that people wanted to be careful about that law. So I wonder if they came into this law of starting to throw the bread instead of handing the bread, or I presume they want to show it's a sign of parnasah. Look, I can throw it. I have so much. I don't know what behind that. I didn't research why, but the Gemara says you cannot throw bread, and the Shulchan Aruch also says you can't throw bread. Meaning, and the chidush is we're going to see that you can't even throw bread, even if it's not going to get ruined. Meaning, other foods. If I want to throw you a peanut, I can throw you a peanut. If the peanut falls, it's fine. I'll eat the peanut. It's nothing. It's not going to get ruined. I can't throw a berry to you because I'm going to throw blueberries to you, loose blueberries. What happens if the blueberry falls on the floor? morning, Mr. Cohen. If the blueberry falls on the floor,
Yes.
what happens is the blueberry gets ruined.
Right,
So therefore, you can't throw it. Foods that get ruined as a result of if it drops, you can't throw it. But there's a special halacha regarding bread
right.
that even if it's not going to get ruined, let's say I put something a net to catch that's going to catch the bread,
Right.
or everything at the table is so large, I'm throwing the bread.
Yeah.
It's going on a clean bread. They don't want you to do it. They don't want you to do it. And that's what the Mishnah Berurah says.
How does she they give the bread? How do you give the bread? You put it on a plate?
Either they put it on a plate or they just they put down the bread to the guy next to him and he passes it to the guy next to him.
Right.
And she says, and that's what the Chafetz Chaim quotes the Beit Yosef, that bread is more important than other foods. And bread, even if it does not get ruined as a result of the throwing, let's say you throw it on a clean area, it's not respect for the bread. If it's not respect for the bread, you can't throw it. That's this third halacha. And what's the fourth halacha? Ve'ein somchin et ha'ka'ara b'pat. You can't go ahead, and let's say you want to put a pot, you're going to hold the pot, you're going to put a pot and pot. One is P-O-T and one is pay tough. You want to hold the cup, the bowl of soup, you're going to hold it by, you're going to want to elevate it by supporting it with bread. You're going to put it on top of a bread. You can't do that because some of that might leak, spill out onto the bread, and therefore you have waste. It's again, it's a special precaution that we're going to have for bread. Now,
I'll tell you what.
yes.
Now you think about it. Who the hell is going to hold bread with a cup, right? It's unusual, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a soup, it's very hot. So sometimes you can use the pot as a. Now, where are they doing this? In the army, you don't have time. So the kids, 18 years old kids, when they get into food, it's very hot. So they're using the bread. And exactly what you described, I saw it. It's like it's really unusual to say the observation, but
yeah. So again, the question is, we're again focusing on bread. It would seem like we're going to be extra concerned that maybe something's going to spill on the bread.
Right.
Maybe on other foods, you might not have to be as concerned that maybe something's going to spill on it, perhaps. But bread, we're going to be extra careful. Have a great day, everybody. You came.
Of course I think.
We're going to have a second
I like
session for the
that.
people who didn't make it.